Welcome to the Missouri Instructional Leaders Network, where we bring together Missouri instructional leaders to share their experiences, grow professional relationships, and build curriculum and instruction skills. My name is Valerie Montgomery, and this morning we have a special guest from DESE, the Director of Student Wellness, Katie Epema. Katie is going to share some updates on the state's trauma-informed school initiatives. And as she's sharing, please feel free to ask questions, either to unmute or to put them in the chat. So Katie, thank you so much for being here with us this morning, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to get to share a little bit about what we have going on with trauma-informed schools and some of the other things that we do here at the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. I am relatively new in my position as a Director of Student Wellness. I work within the School Counseling and Student Wellness section in the Office of College and Career Readiness. So today I'll talk a little bit about how we support student wellness generally, but mainly focusing on that trauma-informed schools initiative. Along with the others here in my section, I also get to support social emotional learning, character education, and collaborate with the school-based mental health section to provide school mental health training. So kind of all things related to student wellness. And when in the department we think about student wellness, we are really thinking about all the different factors that impact a student's academic attainment. So the physical, mental, emotional, and social pieces. Here at DESE, we use the whole school, whole community, whole child, or the WISC framework. And one of the programs that is part of this, led by my colleague Jimmy Hale, is the Missouri Healthy Schools program, which believes that when students are healthy and safe, that's when we can really expect those positive academic, physical, mental, social, and emotional outcomes. So one resource is the Mo Healthy Schools website, which shares resources for all Missouri schools related to food and nutrition, school health services, physical education and activity, social and emotional climate, health education, and employee wellness. And I will share a copy of these slides with you, Valerie, to share out with everyone. So you'll have the clickable links because there's a lot of resources I want to share, and I'm going to go through them kind of quickly today. Last month, when Chrissy Bayshore and Lisa Deerking were on, they talked about the social emotional framework that the state has made available. This is an optional framework. It is not required, but if school districts are working to provide social emotional learning to their students to become successful, productive contributors to a global society, this framework is now out. It came out on the website in December, so that is a resource available that you may want to check out. And of course, I want to remind you about the social emotional learning supports available through the Show Me SEL webpage. This is an interactive webpage that links to many of the different initiatives related to social emotional learning that are going on in the department. So in gifted education, the school counseling section and curriculum, early childhood, the Missouri Healthy Schools, and others. But then the bulk of my time today, I'm excited to talk about the trauma-informed approach, which is something that is near and dear to my heart, trauma-informed initiatives. In Missouri, the Trauma-Informed Schools Initiative provides information and training to school districts regarding the trauma-informed approach, how schools can become trauma-informed, and has a website about that initiative that includes information for both schools and parents. More information can be found in this Trauma-Informed Schools Initiative guide. I'm a pretty informal, interactive type of presenter. So please, I echo what Valerie said, feel free to unmute and ask a question. Drop it in the chat. For some reason, I can't see the chat, but I'll make sure we get to those questions at the end, or Valerie or Chrissy, feel free to pop in and ask them as they come.
Sure.
But I've also developed this kind of as a pop quiz style myth or fact type of event. Feel free to, however you're most comfortable, jot down the answer yourself. When we come to a myth or fact slide, drop it in the chat. Or don't. We're not going to grade it. I'm not going to keep track of who says what. So really there's no right or wrong. You just take your best guess. That's fine. And in the sake of time, we're not going to delve deeply into what the impact of trauma is on students or the trauma-informed schools indicators, but all of those can be found in the Missouri Model for Trauma-Informed Schools Guide, which will be linked later on in this presentation. Also, as I mentioned, going to share a lot of resources, hopefully which aren't new to you, but just to let you know, oh, hey, this could fit into what our school's doing with trauma-informed. So again, all the links will be there so you can check those out at your leisure. So when we talk about a trauma-informed approach, so we're on the same page, a trauma-informed approach is really just one that involves understanding, responding to the symptoms of chronic interpersonal trauma and traumatic stress across the lifespan. So when we're thinking trauma, we could be thinking of events, one event, a series of events, set of circumstances that someone experiences as harmful or life-threatening, and that can have long-lasting adverse effects. Of course, those are just the individual traumas. There's also poverty, community violence, and other things that impact our students as well. There are a variety of trauma-informed approaches out there, and DESE recommends the Missouri model. So our guidance all comes from the Missouri Model for Trauma-Informed as the framework. A trauma-informed school then is one that realizes that trauma is incredibly widespread and understands potential paths to recovery. It recognizes what the signs and symptoms of trauma are in students and teachers and staff, and then responds by fully integrating that knowledge into its policies, procedures, and practices, as well as seeking to resist re-traumatization. So trauma-informed schools are places that provide safe and supportive environments for children to learn and educators to work. It's not just a school where staff knows about trauma or where there's a therapeutic classroom or additional mental health supports. It's one that's really more holistic. So, myth or fact number one, what do you think? Is it a myth or is it a fact that schools in Missouri are required to become trauma-informed? Like I said, feel free to throw it in the chat, jot it down to yourself. Just think about myth or fact. That is a myth. There is no requirement that schools in the state of Missouri become trauma-informed. DESE is required to provide information to schools about what it means to be trauma-informed, but it does not require that schools provide trauma training to staff or begin the journey to become trauma-informed. And the reason for that is that journey can be a long one. It can be a very difficult one. And for it to be successful, schools really must be bought in and be intentional. You may find as we talk that there are practices that you're already doing, whether or not you're doing them because you're intentionally on the trauma-informed journey, that can be supportive, but it is not a requirement in Missouri. Schools do have a requirement, however, to provide the address of the DESE trauma-informed website to all parents before October 1st of each school year. And that is the website shown on your screen, the dese.mo.gov/trauma-informed. That website includes the different guides we're talking about today, as well as the one shown on the screen, which is a parent and caregiver resource guide. These tools were first released in 2019, so we are in the beginning steps of reconvening the majority of the team who put those together to review, revise, and come up with some more resources if there have been changes in the last few years, as we know we have since this was a post-COVID item. So stay tuned for more coming that way. Myth or fact 2. Trauma only impacts students living in poor urban environments, or none of the students in our school have experienced trauma. So something we have heard before. So myth or fact? That is a myth. We know that trauma is extremely pervasive in all communities. It affects everyone. The landmark Adverse Childhood Experiences, or ACE studies in the early 90s showed that about 2/3 of adults had experienced at least one or more adverse childhood experience. And more recent research in the US shows that about 90% of adults report having experienced at least one traumatic event. We also know that 1 out of 4 children attending school have witnessed or experienced a traumatic event before the age of 4. And recent research shows that about 2/3 report at least one traumatic event by the age of 16. So this is a large percentage of our students. Next myth or, yeah.
Can I interject a question here?
Absolutely.
If maybe my district hasn't started a trauma-informed initiative, but I was curious into like seeing what maybe the data behind my students. Is there a tool that we can measure that we could use to see how much trauma is. Does that make sense?
There are different tools out there that can be used to measure kind of the amount of trauma that students have been through. Those aren't specific tools that the department has put out there for districts to use. It would kind of be your school district could look and see what you might want to use. I know there are districts who will look as kind of a starting off point, maybe if they have information on the percentage of students receiving free and reduced lunch. We know poverty does not necessarily equal trauma, but children experiencing poverty tend to face more stressors that can lead to trauma. Or they might look at rates of child abuse and neglect as a kind of a general starting off point. But there are different tools that can be used to actually assess trauma.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. So next myth or fact, trauma-informed practices are just about our students. That is also a myth. We know that trauma not only shows up in schools in the experience of our students, but also our educators who are impacted by trauma they experience both outside the school and vicarious trauma they might experience within it from working with students who have experienced trauma. We want to intentionally focus on staff well-being as well, because if we just focus on trauma-informed practices with students, we run the risk of facing barriers like staff burnout, turnover, and compassion fatigue. And there are lots of great resources available to help support staff who are experiencing some of those. One of them is Teach Well. This is from the Missouri Department of Mental Health that offers these great little things that come via email or via text to really recognize that emotional and mental well-being of educators really impacts their ability to create that positive learning environment. These are short things that can address topics such as preventing burnout, work-life balance, trauma, post-traumatic growth. So feel free to check that out individually or as a group. The Department of Mental Health also has free trauma-informed care courses. They're not specifically geared for educators, but the content would still be applicable. They address things like the impact of trauma on individuals, trauma-informed systems, resilience, adverse childhood experiences, preventing trauma, and where to get help. Next, myth or fact. We've had a training on trauma. We are trauma-informed. What do you think? Is this a myth? Is it a fact? It's a myth. We know that training on trauma is a very important first step, but just having participated in a training does not mean that a school is trauma-informed. The trauma-informed process is an ongoing one. Usually takes a good 3 to 5 years for a school to feel like they've addressed all the parts of their policies, procedures, and practices. And it's not really one that's ever completed because things are constantly changing. I'm going to very briefly talk about the stages of trauma-informed in the Missouri model. These are outlined in a lot more detail in the Missouri Model for Trauma-Informed Schools Guide and the Trauma-Informed Schools Initiative document, so you can find more touch points on what might fit in each section. But we'll start with pre-aware, which is before we really have started or learned much about trauma, and then move into trauma aware. So the first step, that's when you've had that universal training for all staff, so they've learned something about trauma, maybe started to consider how that information might change what they do within the school system. In trauma sensitive, we're going to start to explore some of those principles. How do they apply to what we're already doing? It's when we're going to come up with a team or leaders to start guiding that change process, including leadership and a variety of other school personnel. And then starting to collaborate with the community and other stakeholders, letting them know we're interested in this trauma-informed journey and working together on that. Then moving into trauma sensitive, that's often a couple years down the road, but when schools start to both change their existing practices and policies and starting to implement some new ones to better support staff and students, really integrating that approach into things they're already doing, such as character ed, restorative practices, response to intervention, positive behavior intervention and supports, multi-tiered systems of support, etc. You're seeing some changes in action and behaviors of individual staff and increased community and stakeholder involvement. And then trauma informed. that's when we get to start seeing the changes. That core team continues to work for new opportunities to improve. You're seeing buy-in from everyone. Practices are changing. We're using data to drive our decision making and continuing to be responsive with schools and community members. This is a stage that like I said, is never really completed. Since those environments, resources, and needs are always changing, we're always going to use that trauma-informed lens to think about what we're doing, how we could improve. So trauma-informed is really a process, not a destination, which is great, but also tricky because there's not just a checklist that you can say, check, 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 check. I did these things, we're trauma-informed. It's continuing on. So one resource that is helpful for this is a Trauma-Informed Schools Echo from the University of Missouri that guides participants such as social workers, administrators, school nurses, school counselors, teachers, others who are interested, meets monthly to discuss cases, of course, with confidentiality in place, and then uses a Missouri model to guide participants to realize some of those things like how widespread trauma is, recognizing signs and symptoms, paths to recovery, how can we use self-care, how can we put different strategies in place for the children with whom we work. Another helpful resource for school staff can be mental health first aid training. This Mental Health Missouri or Mental Health First Aid Missouri is operated by the Department of Mental Health and the Missouri Institute for Mental Health. They're offering free mental health first aid classes, which can be focused on either supporting other adults with their mental health and substance use issues as a first responder, not us providing these services, but being supportive to others, or one for working with youth. If that's something that's interesting to you, if you go to this website, the Mental Health First Aid Missouri website, and click on the Mental Health First Aider drop-down menu, there's options to select individual training or to request to have trainers come to your school and train staff there. Both are free. And then until February 9, there is an application open for funding for teen mental health first aid, which is an opportunity to have some of your staff trained to provide mental health first aid training to students in grades 10 through 12. So just follow that teen mental health first aid link for more information if applying for that is something that you'd be interested in. Another wonderful resource that's available currently is the Community Action Poverty Simulation. As I mentioned earlier, we know that nearly 1 in 5 students in Missouri experience poverty. And when kids are in poverty, they have that higher rate of ongoing stressors, which can lead to trauma. So understanding how poverty affects children and their families is critical. The poverty simulation is a really cool kind of hands-on demonstration about the impacts of poverty. And currently there's funding available through the Department of Health and Senior Services School Health Team to provide that free to students. That funding's available through June of 2024. So if that's something you're interested in, you can reach out to Ben Pringer, whose contact information is on the screen to get that set up. Next, myth or fact. Trauma-informed is just one more thing for teachers to do. May have heard this a time or two. That's a myth. And the reason we consider that a myth is we really don't want trauma-informed to feel like just another program to implement. Now, we all get initiative fatigue, but rather it's a shift in how programs are implemented. Using those multi-tiered systems of support can buffer the impact of trauma and promote healing, and all students benefit from being in a trauma-informed school, not just those who have experienced trauma. So that's not just one separate add-on thing to do. It's infused in what is already going on. Existing policies, practices, so replacing ones that don't serve students and creating that safe environment. Got resources here too. We know that educators and school staff play an incredibly important role in promoting mental health and well-being for their students, but often they say, well, I don't have training in that. That's not something I feel comfortable doing. I don't know how to do that. To address that need, the Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, MHTTC, and the National Center for School Mental Health developed a free self-guided online course that focuses on educator mental health literacy. So it includes topics like promoting mental health and well-being of students, so creating safe and supportive classrooms, understanding and supporting students who are experiencing adversity and distress, such as trauma, and classroom strategies to support them. This also has a video library and resource collection available within it too. And of course, school counselors have a wealth of resources available through the department. If they go to this link here, the school counseling website, they have access to their manuals, small group lesson plans for responsive services, the school-wide crisis management plan guide, the school counselor listserv. It's called the school counseling listserv. It's not just for school counselors. So anybody who's interested in getting those updates that might impact some of this, feel free to go there and sign up. And of course, the wonderful school counseling staff here at DESE are wonderful resources too. Another resource is MoCPAP Schools, the Missouri Child Psychiatry Access Project. It offers schools who they partner with consultation on individual students, and all districts in the state are welcome to enroll for those services. And anybody can come access their resource hub to find resources about trauma or professional development information related to trauma. All right, myth or fact 6. Trauma-informed implementation is just solely the responsibility of the school counselor and/or school social worker. So only our mental health staff are responsible for trauma-informed implementation. That is a myth. Well, of course, having those supports can be super helpful. We know not all schools have as many mental health supports as they would like, and that doesn't mean that this process can't happen. Trauma-informed implementation is really the responsibility of everyone. That's why I want to make sure we're sharing resources for teachers, for school counselors, school psychologists, school social workers, nurses, admin, our paras, custodians, food service, bus drivers, community mental health supports. Anyone can create a relationship with a child, which is really the main important thing about trauma-informed. So this is for everyone. However, if you're looking to increase some of those mental health supports and resources available to students, the DESE School Mental Health website has a whole variety of resources. I'm just going to quickly highlight 2 of them today. One up at the top, the School Mental Health Training. This is a training that's available for any state of Missouri who wants to learn about the National Center for School Mental Health best practices. They want to set up or strengthen a school mental health team. Watch for sign up to be coming soon for a session that will be held in April, and we'll probably have one over the summer as well. And also the Stronger Connections grant is the application deadline has been extended to February 9. That grant is a competitive grant for high-need LEAs. So in order to be qualified to apply for that grant, you would have to look in the guidance document to make sure that your LEA is listed. But it has information about how to sign up, questions, contact if you have questions about that grant. And that grant's goal is really to provide students with safe, healthy, and supportive learning environments by increasing mental health supports, professional development, parent and family engagement, and improving school climate and culture. So if you're one of those LEAs on that list, could be a helpful resource, but that deadline is coming up soon. DHSS also has a school health team, which primarily supports school nurses, but their website has a great mental health section that has resources related to mental health concerns, including suicide, trauma and ACEs, resilience, and other things, both for staff and students, and also offers events and trainings. At the end of February, near the end, they're having a coordinated school health coalition, Building Bridges for Healthy Schools and Communities conference coming up down at the lake. And so they have sessions for health teachers, school nurses, wellness coordinators, food service staff, public health partners, school counselors, social workers, school psychologists, physical educators, school administrators, and many of those sessions relate to well-being and mental health. All right, next myth or fact. Trauma-informed practices excuse behavior. They allow kids to act inappropriately because something has happened to them. Myth or fact? That's a myth. Trauma-informed helps us understand behavior so we can better support the underlying need rather than excusing the behavior or punishing children for it. Trauma-informed approach doesn't seek to excuse behavior or lower expectations. It just helps provide the support students need to be successful. And a few resources related to crisis management type services. The Missouri School Board Association Center for Education Safety offers training primarily for their school safety specialists, but part of their training through the School Safety Academy includes mental health and behavioral risk, school climate and culture. They do have a school safety academy coming up free of charge in March in Columbia, and they also have a behavioral risk assessment summit coming up this spring. More information on that is on their website under the Events tab. Burrell also offers training for schools, have several sessions around the state this spring related to crisis management, which is for any mental health professional who provides school mental health crisis intervention services. This particular workshops they have coming up this spring helps those attendees evaluate the level of traumatic impact following a crisis, and then how to provide those direct and indirect services. The Suicide Prevention and 988 Guide for Schools also provides a variety of resources with crisis intervention, response, and postvention and suicide prevention information. Included within that guide are links to the DESE Youth Suicide Awareness Prevention Model Policy, the Missouri School Counselor Association Crisis Manual, and other tools. That is currently being revised, so be on the lookout this spring for a revised version of this guide, but has lots in it already. And last myth or fact for the day. Myth or fact, trauma-informed is strictly a social emotional intervention. That's a myth. Of course, the social emotional is part of it, but when we use a lens of trauma fully embedded in a school, it applies to every aspect, including not just the social emotional efforts, but also instruction, parent engagement, and staff well-being. So to sum up, we hope that today you've either gone, I'd like to start a trauma-informed journey, I'm partway, we'd like to continue going, what do we do, how do we start? We've talked about so many resources today. DESE offers this wonderful model, Missouri Model for Trauma-Informed Schools guide on our dese.mo.gov/trauma-informed website that outlines those steps, the starting with that universal trauma training for all staff, the creating that trauma team, and it goes into more details about who might be on it, what their responsibilities might be. And then step 3, ongoing practice, culture, policy, and systems change. It includes a list of 12 different trauma-informed schools indicators that can help leaders understand what are we already doing related to trauma, even if we didn't realize it was related to trauma, and what are areas we might want to focus on. Just like no two schools are the same, no two trauma-informed journeys are going to look the same. It's important for each district or school to look at what are we already doing, what are our goals with this trauma-informed practice. So the last resource I want to share with you is one that if you're thinking, yes, we'd like to look a little bit more into this, we want to see what we're doing well, where we might be able to go, are some tools through the SHAPE system. The SHAPE system is a school health assessment and performance evaluation system. It is available from the National Center for School Mental Health. It's a free web-based platform that offers schools, districts, and others to really access resources to support school mental health quality improvement. It has a variety of different self-assessments in it, including the school mental health quality assessment, and the one I want to share briefly, which is the trauma responsive schools implementation assessment, which is a mouthful, so TRSIA. This, again, it's an evidence-informed self-assessment that is designed to help school systems recognize what they're already doing and where they might want to go. It's going to look at what's already in place with these different things: school safety planning, prevention planning, trauma programming, those classroom strategies, prevention, early intervention, targeted programming, staff self-care, and community engagement. And then the wonderful thing about filling out this assessment, which really only takes about 20 minutes, is that it will provide feedback reports to support districts with what is going well, and then links to other resources to help with that. So within this SHAPE system, there are actually 4 different resource libraries focused on school mental health quality, trauma responsiveness, early childhood, so preschool, and the screening and assessment library. Each of these contains some resources related to trauma. And there's incredible hundreds of resources within here, so that can be helpful as well. I felt like I had a lot to share. So now I'm going to pop up my contact information. I will, like I said, share this with Valerie so you'll have the links to everything. But I do want to stop sharing my screen so I can see if there's questions that have come in the chat. Please feel free to unmute and ask. We do want to hear from you. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have questions about this or questions as you start on your trauma-informed journey. I'd love to hear where your school is, whether it's something you've not thought about, you're beginning to think about, you've been working on for a long time, as we start providing the most helpful resources to you. So please, please do not hesitate to reach out.
Katie, thank you. That was very informative. That was very rich with resources. I'm glad that I'm recording it so that people can pause and actually, like you said, I will share the slideshow so people have access to all of those wonderful links that you've given us. I'm also curious to hear where everybody is, and you mentioned that it's not a destination, it's a process. And so I'm curious to hear those on the meeting today. Where are you with your school in the process? Are you just getting started, or is it something you've been working on for a few years? Anyone want to be brave and share?
I'll be brave. Now, clearly I work at Step Up, as my background says, but I just retired as a principal, and I was honored to be a part of the Hickman Middle School District that started the trauma-informed care process back in 2019. And I will say that not only did it help us navigate COVID, but it also allowed us to approach things totally different. It improved attendance. It helped us have insights into discipline. It helped us figure out how to provide wraparound services for our community, for our parents. And it was led by, I had a fantastic social worker, so that was the driving force. But it definitely changed the way we had a continuum of consequences, because restorative circling and restorative conferences became a big part of that, rather than just suspension for egregious behavior. We wanted to make sure they were welcomed back in and that they were able to restore relationships. So I'm a huge supporter, and I'd like to see it not a myth that it is not required. I wish it was required. So thank you for everything you shared.
Thank you. And I should mention, you asked earlier, Valerie, about ways that districts could assess, trauma amongst their students. There are resources that could be used for that within that SHAPE system, if that is something that districts wanted to do. That would be something they could look at and choose, see what might fit with them if they wanted to use some of those.
Okay, thank you. And thanks for sharing, Sue. I do wonder if you're in a district and maybe you're thinking about taking this on, but you have, like, if I were just playing devil's advocate, why would, and Sue kind of gave us some anecdotal notes there, but like, why would a school want to do this? How could you convince those naysayers or those parents that, who believe those myths of, oh, we're just making excuses for behavior? Is there data to support why would we implement?
I think there is increasing amounts of data out there showing how using some of the practices that go along with trauma-informed do a lot of the things Sue talked about, not only increasing attendance, supporting student success, supporting teachers, hopefully reducing some of those rates of burnout. I know I recently heard that, and this may be a correlation, we don't know for sure if it's causative, but since more schools seem to be implementing more of the trauma-informed, they've actually increased graduation rates, decreased some of those discipline, type things. But again, that may be not necessarily causative. That's always a thing you have to look at with data, but it does have such wide-reaching impacts beyond just think about students who've experienced trauma. Putting those practices in place really support all students within a school system.
And human beings as a whole, right? Like, we are giving them skills that will go beyond K-12. So
Absolutely.
Okay, any other questions for Katie? Or comments? Comments are fine too. Okay.
I was going to say, my hope is that everybody has found some resource, either that reminded them, oh, yeah, I want to check out that resource, or something new and different. I'm going to try dropping in the chat for those who are watching live. Hopefully, clicking on that should take you to the resource document or the copy of the slides with the resource links in it. If not, like I said, I will send it to Valerie also so she can put it out with the YouTube information. But that will have the clickable links because I know I covered those resources really quickly.
Thank you for doing this. I just wanted to mention there are 3 of us on here from Chillicothe, Missouri, but we did the Trauma Smart training with all of our staff, that training with Crittenton, and our county health center combined with our school district to pay for that so that every single staff member, so not just teachers, but all staff could be trained in Trauma Smart. And that's been several years, like, I don't know, 5 or 7, quite a while, but it made a huge difference in our staff morale. So not only was it wonderful for students, it really helped our staff help each other, support each other, and become aware of what we needed to do. So that was our good starting point. A few of us also attended the Missouri model training in Kansas City around that same time. And they just go hand in hand. It's so great. And we have seen a big difference. In fact, we've had some of our staff retrained. They enjoyed it so much and felt like it was so useful for them. So I do think it's wonderful and would agree it should be insisted upon, not just a recommendation.
Well, yes, we know that taking these principles and applying them to the staff helps us be able to manage and regulate our own selves, which helps us be able to support those students. And I agree with what you said earlier with regarding to, responding to COVID, all of that, having these in place. And I think having gone through COVID, a lot more of us can understand traumatic stress and the impact of that longer term stress on ourselves and on our students.
Thank you for sharing, Natalie. Okay. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, we can go ahead and wrap up. I know we've all got probably getting back to normal after all these snow days. Or is Chillicothe on a snow day today too? Yeah. Okay, well, some of us are no snow and some of us have snow. So, but again, thank you so much, Katie. Thank you for the work you're doing and for all these wonderful resources. And I will be sure to share them all with everybody. So thanks again, and everyone have a great day. Bye.